Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Alex.
Happy to be here.
And also we've got a very special guest, Dante Edwards. Thank you for joining us, Dante.
Happier to be here than Alex.
Okay, you beat him. That's good. Dante, for people who may be listening who don't have any context for who you are, tell us a little bit about what you do at the church.
Yeah, I'm pretty new. I am the Assistant Director of Missions, so I work under Eva. I mostly engage with local stuff, which is volunteering, local partnerships, sort of getting out into the city and like being the hands and feet of Jesus with some of our volunteers who are amazing. I was a resident for 2 years before that in the same sort of department, and I liked it enough to hang out, and you guys liked me enough to let me hang out, so here I am.
Awesome. Glad that you're here. And we also have the one and only Minister Mark Ashton. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing this week?
Pretty good. I'm tired, to be honest. The last 3 days have been very long days, working on some of the cultural issues that are emerging and pastoring people through that in addition to, the normal job. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a little bit tired, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, if people are wondering why we've gathered all these brilliant minds around this table today, it is because of something that has been in the forefront of our minds and our culture's minds and hearts. And, it's undeniable the weight that people are feeling right now, mm-hmm. whether that's spiritual, whether that's emotional. There is, there's just a heaviness, and people on all sides of different arguments are feeling grief for different reasons. But it's also just been kind of violent past, couple weeks, whether you're looking at the school shooting that happened in Minnesota, or even before that, the assassination of the public officials in Minnesota, the refugee from, Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, refugee from Ukraine who was murdered, and then of course the Charlie Kirk assassination that happened last week. There has been an outpouring of support for his family, and there's been a lot of grieving, and also just a lot of rhetoric and a lot of conversations happening in and out of the church. Charlie was pretty outspoken about his faith, and I think that leads to a lot of mixed signals when you start merging faith and politics. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. And there's some things that I think it's just healthy to get them out of the way, because if people are tuning in, this is probably the stuff they're curious about right away. And I'm like, let's just get past that before we, and then address the other things. I think one of the things we saw this past week was several NFL teams had a moment of silence for Charlie. You have kind of your radical celebrity pastors like Mark Driscoll out there saying this is something he posted, which it's not to platform Driscoll, and I know there's a lot of controversy there, but I think he has built a platform again to where there are a lot of people who are listening and supporting him, and he's speaking to a certain group of people that find his rhetoric very comforting. And what he's encouraging people to do is, if your pastor doesn't address the demonic acts that happened this week, he's a coward, not a pastor. Find a Bible-believing, courageous church as soon as possible. We need the gospel and courage now more than ever. I heard someone say that his team was actually working on putting together a list of churches that they could recommend to you. So they're asking people to report back if their pastor talked about this Sunday, and if they did, they'll put them on a list of the good churches that you could attend. So yeah, let's just dive into it, Mark. If people are wondering why didn't this come up Sunday? Why didn't you talk about this? I mean, we even had a Google review come in that was 1 star, went to church looking to hear something, got a history lesson. Looking to be comforted, and I got a history lesson. Yeah. So what's your take on that? How have you been responding to people? I know you sent an email out Monday. There's a blog post on cccomaha.org. You posted on your Facebook page. What's your thoughts, and how do you help people that are processing this?
Yeah, let me take a step back and talk a little bit about the philosophy of church at Christ Community and what Sunday mornings are for. And then that'll kind of make obvious the reasons why we make the decisions that we make. So philosophy of church is that we're here to worship Jesus and teach the Bible on Sunday mornings, and that's what our focus is. That's what our focus is going to be. There are some churches that choose a different philosophy, that they respond to current events on Sunday mornings and help walk people through that. Usually those are either far right-leaning or far left-leaning churches that choose to do that, and that's their prerogative if that's what they'd like to do. But our goal is that we're trying to reach people and disciple people. We focus on Jesus. We focus on the Bible on Sunday mornings. And it's rare for us to talk about current event kinds of issues, whether it's assassinations or school shootings or elections or political events. I would say that 99% we leave on the side, and usually only after careful deliberation with our governing board about something that we can really make a difference on do we bring up those kinds of issues to our congregation. And the reason is that in order to do that well, it takes a degree of nuance that takes time during services to talk about in a way that's helpful. So we're very aware that we live in a world where there is a group of people who are watching Fox News 12 hours a day, and they're deeply entrenched in that information. And we got people who are watching MSNBC 12 hours a day, and they're deeply entrenched in that information. And whatever we say in a 3-minute announcement is going to fit very poorly with what they've been hearing all week long on their 24-hour news cycle. And so in order for us to be able to comment on current events in a way that is savvy, biblical, disciple-making, and helpful, it's a time-consuming exercise that we usually do with great care. And so having knee-jerk reactions, so this would be less than a week to be able to respond to an event that happened in our culture, is a rarity for us. In fact, I'm trying to think, I don't know if there's ever been a time that we've done that without having some, thoughtful dialogue before we engage in those types of things. But instead, our general perspective is we focus people on Jesus. We teach the Bible really well. That's what we did on Sunday. We chose to do that. Now, I would say, if I'm going to add on to why did we shift later? Why did I make some comments later on? I did have feedback from people that came that afternoon. 2 of them were elders. Probably 8 or 10 other people that either texted or emailed or, talked to me about things and said, hey, I think this is important enough that we really should pastor people through the moment. And I would say there's a subset of our congregation, probably every congregation. It's certainly not half, it's a minority percentage of our congregation who would say this was a very important moment in my life. And I really wanted to hear some words of pastoral comfort around this. And I thought, that's a fair thing for folks to ask for. So after consulting with the vice chair of our governing board, the 2 of us together kind of made a decision that it would be a wise thing for me to do something that would be of comfort to the folks who are in that arena. And so I chose a couple of things to talk about that I think are obvious and safe things that you can say about the violence of the week in general, about prayer, about evangelism, about some of the good things from Charlie Kirk's life, and we put those things out in a post that went, not to everybody on Sunday morning, but more broadly. One of the interesting things I would say is that there are many communication venues that churches have, including the Uncomfortable podcast, blog forums, Facebook, all those kinds of things, and Sunday morning is one of those. And it's impossible to fit everything that you want to talk about through the narrow window of a Sunday morning service with multiple things that are trying to be accomplished there. I don't pretend that I do everything perfect all the time, and sometimes I have some regrets on, what we choose to put in and not put in. But I would say it's a good practice in general to assume the best motives of people, the best motives of pastors that are trying to make hard decisions. If you think about it, every pastor has, let's say, 50 current events that happen that week that they have to decide, do I put it in or take it out? So it's not just like there's one thing that happens and it's really obvious. It's an every week, 50 decision week for a pastor to make on the things that they talk about and don't talk about. So, some of the broad generalizations that are coming out, like the Driscoll one that you mentioned that says, hey, unless your pastor talked about this issue in this way, you should go to another church. I would say that's just silly and divisive. It's a kind of commentary from somebody who has a long history of being divisive and critical of other churches. And he uses that as a way to get clicks and likes and follows and people coming to his church. And that's one way to build a church. I think is a horrible way to build a church. And so I would say be very cautious when you're listening to other pastors who say, if you didn't do it my way, you did it wrong, and you should go to another church.
Yeah, and I think even to some of the other platforms, like I don't live on the app, but I'm there a lot. Like if you were on the app, you saw several, people inviting prayer, and like it seemed like we were equipping our saints in a big way to do the work of the ministry, to be praying for one another, to be praying for the things that were happening inside of this. We've got community groups that are meeting in homes, that are meeting here at the church throughout the week. And so those are also a couple other avenues where hopefully people are being ministered to one another and ministering to others throughout the week that I saw, in just my own eyes, and just through that, like, okay, this was still being addressed. It wasn't like we were living under a rock and nobody knew that this happened and all those kinds of things. And so even outside of that, there's definitely ways that if it's just a statement from you, a 3-minute statement from you, and that's going to be the only thing that brings comfort, then we're also probably doing church a little bit wrong, right?
Yep.
And so I think there is that balance. And so you addressing that, I think, is a good thing for our congregants to hear.
Well, even from the team that you and I work on, Alex, with guiding social media, we made a decision quite a while ago to just stop kind of playing that game of, okay, we're going to post every time there's a earthquake or a hurricane, or pray for California, pray for Florida, pray for we couldn't keep up. We'd be posting something every day, or school shootings or those sort of things. It's like we've had these conversations on the podcast before that humanity isn't really meant to absorb all of this all the time, and also there's kind of a darker side to that. And you hit on that with Driscoll. People do that because they know it's something that's going to drive interaction. They're gonna get shared. Because people are reeling, people are feeling these heavy emotions, and they want to find someone else to kind of express their convictions for them in a certain way. It's kind of I think a coping mechanism, and so even that, when you juxtapose that to our recent immigrant series, where people heard us being very outspoken about something that felt very political, and they don't realize, well, that was God working behind the scenes months and months and months in advance, because that was already planned out. It wasn't a reactionary series, correct?
That's right.
So I think they're comparing the two events and going, well, you were willing, you were willing to be the woke pastor in this instance, but you weren't willing to be the MAGA pastor in this instance,
Yeah.
So it's hard to be everything to everyone. It's never going to happen.
It's really true. It's really true. And anytime you speak out about any kind of an issue, you're going to create some division in your church around that, and people that'll react in negative ways on both sides. Now, I'm not afraid of that. Anyone who's been at Christ Community long enough knows that I'm not afraid to talk about controversial issues and work them through with people. But I want to do it well. I really want to have enough time to create effective dialogue around things, to help people think biblically about things, and not just in a way that's reactionary. And the truth is, social media has driven us towards reactionary, fast, quick hit positions that really oftentimes are weak on the side of information, weak on the side of biblical, and strong on the side of emotion. And I don't think that that's a healthy way to lead a church or make disciples. We want to have people that are, thoughtful, well-informed, biblical in the way that they're approaching things. And sometimes that just takes time.
I was reading just someone talking about history, and that it's only been the last 30 years of all world history that we've had to be forced to, one, have all of this stuff like put in our face. You feel like you have to respond to something, that there isn't an ability for there to be just to calm down. I hear, one time from somebody through a newspaper, or, even before that, through word of mouth. And so it's only been in the last 30 years where instant everything has been happening. And we don't know, what this is doing to our souls. Yeah.
That's right.
That pressure even to feel like you have to respond. I feel like things like this, everybody felt a pressure. If I don't give my opinion on this, then I failed. No, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. I already failed if I didn't give an opinion on this. And there's so many of those things inside of our world. And then obviously you've got the backdrop of 9/11 happening, the morning of even that happening the day after, Charlie's murder, which is a devastating, time in the history of our country. So there's just so much pressure to respond, to not even be able to have nuance or actually think about it, because I'm taking in so many thoughts from other people. I don't have time to pray about it. I don't have time to sit and lament. I'm just stuck there. And so as news like this breaks, and it seems like it's always breaking, that's just one of those things that I've felt in my emotions of like, I don't even have time to have emotions. I have to respond. I have to breathe. I have to answer questions. I don't know if I'm numb. I don't know what emotions I have, because they just jump all over the place. And then I can get triggered by reading one person's post and the next person. So I'm just curious for all of you guys, like what, as these things unravel, what are just the feelings that you begin to have as you hear about a Charlie Kirk, or you hear about there's a notification on my phone, another school shooting? What are kind of just what's going through your minds and your hearts in these moments?
Man, it was just so sad. First of all, I mean, there's a complexity to all of the emotions that go into responding to something like this. But the first thing I felt was just sad. I think after you get a certain number of these notifications and then you get some more, it starts to feel like, man, this is just horribly sad that this is something that's a part of the way that we live. I think the other thing that was really exhausting was that we jumped so quickly, and on some level it's natural, but I think that we tend to jump so quickly into legacy and combine that conversation with the conversation about the violence, as if a person's legacy makes it okay or not okay for what happened to them. And to put it plainly, not okay, period. No one should go through that. And to see, like, within minutes, within hours, people having conversations about, well, he said this, so he deserved it, or, well, he was this, so he didn't. I mean, like you were saying, there's no time to breathe. There's no time to just sit and be like, wow, someone else. It happened again.
Yeah. I know for me, it's similar to Dante. There's an initial sadness that comes into play. But I also think because of the speed with which these come, this is like 2 a day, 10 a week, whatever you would call it. And I'm kind of a newsie. I like listening to the news and finding out things that happen in this world. You don't really have the time or capacity to really process things emotionally. Like, you hear the news and then you go through the drive-through and get your burger, or, you hear the news and then you're going to play pickleball, or those types of things. So you're not really sitting in the depth of the emotion for very long. You're on to the next thing. And sometimes I think that that's going to create a weariness in your soul that's going to drive you to need to get counseling at some point in your life, because you just have an overwhelming number of emotional things that hit, and it's easy to become numb to the tragedies that are out there after an initial wave of grief or sadness.
Yeah, I think it's the first thing I thought was I heard it from someone saying it, and then so I'm immediately, you go to your phone and go, wait, is this real? Because that's like my number one thing. Is this actually happening? And then of course the video was not something that wasn't possible for social media, channels to take it down right away or to censor it. So it's like I go to my phone and the first thing you see on X is actually the video. And so that's shocking. And you're like, what did I just witness? And then you're starting to process everything else, and you're seeing all the, like you said, Dante, you see all the static, all the other things, all the hot takes, and people looking for others to have a hot take. And I think in the Christian community, I'm starting to process it in a way that I think what it is because as we start to realize we're not meant to process this much violence and tragedy, that Christians are outsourcing their convictions. And I think they're looking to others to say what they need to hear or how to think, just because it's like, I can't process all this. And so if I find that person who says the thing, and I think Charlie was one of those people who would say the thing they wanted to say, but felt either shy or timid or whatever, it wasn't the right thing for them to say in their current situation, but he could say it. And so I think as they started to do that, I think that even ties into the fabric of why there's so much weight and grief around that community, because he was kind of that mouthpiece for them in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Did you, Alex? Did you have anything to add
No, yeah,
to the
I was
way
just
you were
curious.
processing
No,
it,
just
or
curious
what
about
you personally?
about how that all goes. Because like you said, it's that grief, that sadness. There's something that so Thursday, my day began with a phone call with a woman in our congregation whose mom is about to face hospice, and so that was kind of the morning, which isn't a normal morning. It happens every so. So she's like, I'm feeling this grief. I'm feeling this weight. How do I just keep her along? Do I not? And she's wrestling through that. And so we had a conversation together. She happens to attend here, but also be a neighbor. And so there's like that emotion. I know the mom, and there's that emotional side of it. And then this happened, about a little in the afternoon, and like I saw all these things, got these notifications on my phone while Jess was actually recording a podcast about narcissism last week. And then my next meeting after that was with a gentleman at the church whose son died, and so we're planning his funeral. And so for me, it was just a heavy day of just loss and tragedy, and also wrestling through some of the implications of when anybody that's an image bearer of God dies, it's painful. Not even the son wasn't even a believer, and the father made that known to me, but he was lamenting and grieving. And then I was just wrestling with, does one of these lives have more value? Like, are we assigning, and obviously one has more public, people are going to know and all that. But I really was wrestling with all three of those people, and sitting with a family of a couple of them, like, man, how are they feeling in this moment? They're lamenting, they're grieving, dealing with their own loss, and you stack this on top of it. And how are we as society creating a place where one life does seem to have more value or gets more legacy or whatever than another? And that's a product of our culture. But that was what some of the stuff I was wrestling through that day, which was a really heavy day. And it just felt, man, how do we do that? How do we continue to love those people? And so that was kind of my day in a nutshell.
Okay, well, I think going from that, a natural thing that we could transition into is martyrdom. I think Dante, you mentioned legacy, and a lot of people right away started to say Charlie was a martyr for the Christian faith. I would love to hear people's if they agree with that or what they don't. I mean, I think for me personally, and I think Alex and I have processed this a lot too. It's like, could it be argued that he was a political martyr? I think so. I don't know as much as a Christian martyr or martyr for the Christian faith. I don't know if I agree with that as much, but I'd love to hear other takes or understandings of that.
I think we'll know when and if the person who is the shooter says what his motivations were.
Yeah, right.
So if he comes out and he says, my motivations were because Charlie's a Christian and I want to kill Christians, then we can say martyr. If he says, I don't like that he's politically on the right and I disagree with his views on, trans or COVID or whatever view there would be out there, then you would say it was an assassination, a political assassination. If you ask me to guess right now, and this is in the world of guessing, I think it was a political assassination. He had a lot of controversial views that he would espouse that would ding people. He was somebody who was a passionate Christian and evangelist, but there weren't a lot of people who said, I hate him because he's a passionate Christian evangelist. There are a lot of people who hated him for his political views. So if I go in likeliness, I would say martyr is at least premature, if not inappropriate, and assassination is likely.
Yeah.
It's still horrible.
Yeah, right.
By the way,
Right.
it's still horrible.
Right.
Yeah, these are two different horrible ways to leave Earth. Neither of them are okay. I agree. I think martyrdom is pretty much decided by the person who does the act. If that was the motivation, then that was the motivation. I think it can be hard to sort of wrestle those things apart, especially in the way that we sort of do politics and culture now. I think it's totally appropriate and natural for our opinions and stances on those things to come out of our faith. But I do think that there's a difference between our opinion and stances and our faith. And for people who struggle to pull those apart or maybe don't realize that those are different things, being killed for a political stance or for an opinion on, I don't know, family or anything else, can feel like martyrdom because those two things can be tied together so often. I think it's yet to be seen.
Yeah, I jumping to that conclusion is tough, and especially knowing, man, this is real for a lot of people. Martyrdom it's a real thing that is happening, has happened, and is happening across our world, more than most of us really do realize. And so I don't want to discredit or dismantle those who are really, as our church and denomination, we send, people into the hardest to reach places in the world. And people, we just sent an international worker to a place where Christians aren't super welcome, and they're literally putting their life at risk by being there. And, all of us put our lives at risk every day by just living and breathing and getting in a car. But there's this other level of risk that they're walking into for the sake of people knowing the gospel and meeting Jesus, where they have no opportunity ever to, hear Jesus. And so to jump to that conclusion sometimes, knowing the sacrifices others are making feels, disheartening and dishonoring to maybe those who are actually, making those things. And like you guys said, and still just terrible, right? I mean, it's terrible. I mean, you've got somebody like Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., both assassinated politically, but we didn't call them martyrs. I wasn't around, then, but when I read history books, we're not calling them martyrs, both believers in Jesus, right? And it was that. And so, of course, now in my speculation, and it could, like you said, that could turn out to be false, and I'll have to recant that statement like I have many times before in my life, if the shooter does come and say that. But that's just where my sense is right now and where my sensitivity is to it.
Well, and I think why so many people were quick to jump to, Christian martyrdom is what we have been seeing, this trend of whether you want to call it Christian nationalism, however you want to label it, is a merging of identities of faith and politics, where suddenly being a Republican is synonymous with being a Christ follower. And so obviously if they saw, well, Charlie obviously was a devout Christian, and he fought for a conservative Republican belief system. So either way, him dying makes him a Christian martyr, because in our eyes, in our worldview of certain people, they're going to say, well, those things are one and the same, right? And so I think that's something that's at least maybe helpful to address and unpack. And I don't know. I think that's been the last few years, probably since 2020, that's been one of the most difficult, challenging, frustrating things to try to process is how do we in culture help people separate those things and understand that your political ideologies are not your faith and vice versa.
Yeah, I do think that there's some helpful thoughts on that. It's interesting because people would call Charlie Kirk a Christian nationalist. He would say I would separate those things, that I'm a Christian and I'm a nationalist, but I don't put them together in the same title. And legitimately, as Christians, to be pro your country, if that's what a nationalist means, that's great. People in the Bible were pro their country. Joseph, we just studied about this week. Daniel, Esther, Mordecai, Nehemiah. I mean, you can go down a long list of people who were either in politics or were pro, fighting for their country, that are people that are in the Bible. And there's nothing that is wrong with that. In fact, I think that's a laudable characteristic that Christians can and should have. The problem comes when you say, my political viewpoint is the Christian viewpoint. Because oftentimes there's someone on the other side of the aisle who's got a legitimate idea that comes from Scripture, comes from the Holy Spirit, that may be a balancing out of that particular idea. And when you say, because I'm a Christian and I have a particular set of ideas, that means that they're Christian ideas. I think that's where you get into the dangerous compartment. And I've said this before in some podcasts and on Sunday mornings. I think the real danger comes when you say, I want to have power over people in order to be able to enforce my version of political viewpoint and call it Christian. That's where the danger comes in. And we've got a long list of people in the past of history where, say, the leader of the Anglican Church and the King of England were the same person. Well, that's where you run into real danger. Because people will then begin to use religion to manipulate people into their political stances, and it winds up becoming the religion that's abused and misunderstood and co-opted for what would be power plays. And that's where the merging of faith and government becomes very dangerous in people's lives, and really no longer becomes Christian faith. So walking that line, I think, is something that's important for us. But the tipping point is when you say, I want to establish power over for my particular set of viewpoints and marginalize others as patently non-Christian.
And I believe that damages the church from the perspective of the political opponent as well, regardless of who the political opponent is. Because if the idea is that to resist, this side politically is to resist Christianity, now you're conflating those two things as an opponent. So a person might, agree with Jesus on 90% of the things that he said and think that he is a loving, kind person, but then think that to be a Christian means to be politically this way, so I can't be a Christian because that goes against my convictions. So I think it does the church a disservice to both sides of any dichotomy to become tied to one side of any dichotomy. I think as well, Christians ought to be the best citizens in any nation. I think Romans 13 lays out that love fulfills the law. Loving your neighbor makes you a good citizen. I think that there is a degree to which, nationalism in some form demands to be sort of your chief allegiance in some ways. I don't think that means everyone who loves their country worships their country, but I do think that there's a conflation of those two things at times, and that's contrary to God's commandment to not put any gods before him. So I think, the interests of countries, of nations, of empires, and the interests of the church can be mutually exclusive at times. I think sometimes what's best for the country is best for the church and vice versa, and that's great. But I do think that there are times when, for example, countries have enemies. Countries go to war with other countries over resources, land, etc. And for that country, it's in their best interest that the people fighting in the war or supporting the war see the other side as the enemy, so that when we, go and kill those people, it's celebrated. It's a good thing. I think the Bible asks us to do exactly the opposite and to pray for and humanize and understand and love our enemies. And in moments like that and in similar situations, being a Christian and being a nationalist have conflict. And I think unless we address and are honest about and encourage the tension between those two things, they can slide right together, and we can end up in a position where we as the church are allowing or even justifying some really horrible things.
And I think I'm no Charlie Kirk apologist by any means, but like you said, Mark, I think I have seen him say, like, I want to separate those two purposefully. And as culture, I'm a nationalist. I love this country. I'm a patriot, and I'm a Christian. And he tried to do what he could, at least in things I saw, to try to separate those two. And the other thing that I think, I saw from him that was admirable many a times in the arguments that he was having with people was, I'm not going to debate this from a Christian worldview. I want to debate using logic. And of course, at some level, Christianity is our worldview and should inform and all those things. But, I saw, those are a few of the things that I remember that I'm like, oh, that's admirable. I wasn't someone that was...
Yeah.
I didn't follow Charlie Kirk on Instagram personally. I didn't see every one of his videos. Did they come across my feed? I'm like, oh, that's good. I like it. That's stupid. I don't like everybody I follow on social media, right. Even you, Mark, right. There's things I'm like, that's really good. I would say that differently. That's not a knock. That's just humanity, right? That's a knock on anybody. And people say that about me, even my kids, my wife, anybody. And so, but those were a few of those things that I think when it comes to this conversation, I saw and respected in that conversation. Doesn't mean he can't get labeled that, or that people don't want to plump him in that kind of category, that he wasn't a hero of people that might fall in the Christian nationalist category. But I think those are things that I think that I saw in my limited views of Charlie Kirk, trying to separate at least as much as he could that Christian identity and that nationalist identity when people would ask him about it. But there could be stuff on the contrary that he said that I'm like, you're right.
Yeah, that absolutely is the case. And I think that we need to be thoughtful enough to be able to say, hey, we can be nuanced people and not put somebody in the all evil category or the all good category.
Right.
That's one of the strong responses that we've had is I've just been surprised how many people say, all good or all evil about him, and don't say, you know what, I agreed with him on some issues and some not. You know, one of the things I passionately agree with him on is Jesus. And, you know, we can build on that. I agreed with him on dialogue. And when you look at the dialogue that he did with students, sometimes he stepped out of his Christian worldview into logic because we don't share the Christian worldview. And so for me to argue from a different worldview than you're beginning with is really not that helpful. But I'd love to be able to say, where do we have common ground? And if logic is that, we can build on that worldview, or we can build on that and hopefully come to some common conclusions. And I thought that he did that really well. And I think that anytime you're somebody who says, I'm going to go into a public forum, university campus quad, where I don't know what somebody's worldview is, but I'm willing to dialogue with them, it's a real skill to say, where do we have common ground and how can we build from there? And I think that was one of Charlie Kirk's best characteristics, and something that we as followers of Jesus can say, hey, how can we do that better with people around in our culture?
Yeah, I think all of that said, I mean, I think it's important for people to have perspective on why people maybe didn't like him as well. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that that's the difficult part, because like you said, there are things we agree with and we don't or agree with and don't agree with, but when someone dies, I think the focus is going to generally go to the positive.
For sure.
Because you want to honor that person, you don't want to be disrespectful, but then also we're grieving with his family and considering those things. But there was also things that he said that were challenging. Mm-hmm. And even as a Christ follower, I go, I know, I want to believe that was just rhetoric, Charlie. Like, mm-hmm. I want to believe you were saying that just to kind of, you know, rile people up and ruffle some feathers, and that's why you said it that way.
Mm-hmm. Charlie was a young guy, younger. Maybe you're the only one younger than him here, mm-hmm. Dante, but younger than all three of us. And man, I look back at my 31-year-old self
mm-hmm.
That has made hyperbolic comments, this is not to excuse him. This is just that process of sanctification that I was thinking about, because a couple weeks ago I interviewed a guy named Joshua Harris who wrote this book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and he was 20 and wrote this book, and he just hit 50, and our conversation was about, man, what do you regret
mm-hmm.
about that book? Mm-hmm. What hurtful things did you say and you got reaction and feedback from these people, and it gutted you mm-hmm. to know how you spoke about people and how people weaponized, maybe not even things you said, but how people weaponized just that impurity culture and things like that. And that conversation being in the background of a few weeks ago for me was also like, man, and that was a gift that he has through the process of sanctification. He's a guy that, you know, ended up deconstructing, but I think has reconstructed a bit through our conversation. But just that sanctification process of being able to sit with people that I hurt, that I've pained, and I've even done this, you know, before, and have the opportunity to grow and apologize and look a little bit more like Jesus with that humility that Charlie doesn't get. You know, mm-hmm, and mm-hmm. you know, I would pray, and I would guess anybody who's a follower of Jesus that's following him should look more and more like Jesus, and that's the process of sanctification. So my hope and my assumption, also in good grace, if he was a follower of Jesus following the Spirit, is that he would have continued to mature and would have continued to maybe take back some of those statements or apologize to those who he hurt. And so we don't get to write that narrative,
mm-hmm.
but I've also seen that happen in so many people's lives that I'm hopeful that if you really are a follower of Jesus, led by his Spirit, that's going to be the progression of sanctification that you go on as well. That we'll never know. And again, that's all kind of maybe, what if, all that. But when I want to assign things to him, I have to think about that reality in my own life, you know, as well. And hope in my own life, I'm willing to do that. Like, as a
mm-hmm.
response to something like this, somebody that doesn't have that opportunity, how do I self-reflect and figure out, man, there are things that I've done to hurt people, and he doesn't get that opportunity, but I have it.
Yeah.
And where in my life now can I pause and take advantage of some of those opportunities, because I just don't think about it in the day to day. That's not something you think about. But when you have moments like this that happen, it causes me to think that way. And I'm like, okay. So there's been a couple phone calls I've even made this week to a couple different people that I'm like, yeah, I just need to own that and be humble and say sorry for it. That I would have never done.
It's good.
Had this not happened. You know, I just wouldn't have had that time to self-reflect. So that's just another kind of spurring thought too.
Yeah.
It's wise. You know, one of the things I'd love to think, based on what you're saying, Alex, is we can take an awful lot of things from the model of Jesus and the way that he went about doing his ministry when we talk about how do we interact at the intersection of current events or politics and the way that we live our lives. You know, Jesus was somebody who spoke truth to power really strongly. And sometimes when we have parables that we know very intimately, they were actually political overtones that Jesus was giving. You know, for example, when he said, nobody builds a tower and doesn't count the cost first and then winds up with a half-built tower. Well, that was a real thing that Herod was doing, and he was making fun of Herod in the midst of that. It was really a current events thing that he was talking about to his people, and they, you know, didn't understand it. So it's not out of bounds for Christians to be political or talk about political things. But what's interesting about Jesus is two things. One, he never sought political power for himself in order to, there was no merging of faith and a particular kind of a political force that would be out there, the Roman government or a Jewish governance or any of those kinds of things. He just didn't look for those things. And he took people from both extremes and put them on his team. So you got Matthew the tax collector on one extreme, you've got Simon the zealot on the other extreme. One wants to serve the Romans, one wants to kill the Romans. Well, Jesus said, look, all of these people from various political perspectives belong in a new kingdom that has different values than either side of those two coins. And so I think as followers of Jesus, we want to do the same thing. We want to take people who are all over the map in terms of their politics and say, let's integrate them into a new family that has a new kingdom and a new vision for a way to live that's going to transcend any of the other political backgrounds. I think that we need people who are followers of Jesus in the Republican Party to speak to the Republican Party, to inform the Republican Party. We need people in the Democratic Party who are Christians who are going to speak to the Democratic Party about the Democratic Party and bring godly values into both of those arenas. So for us to say avoiding politics is the key is absolutely not right. I think we need to engage in every area of culture, politics, media, education, you name it. So avoiding it is wrong, but also embracing it as your identity and using it to accomplish the kingdom agenda is wrong. I think Jesus saw his movement as a movement of power under, of serving those who are around him rather than enforcing or forcing people who are around him. And as followers of Jesus, that's our best play as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation in this form. Charlie Kirk was a complex person, a nuanced person, and we get to have a complex and nuanced conversation about him. I think in an era of, tweets and TikToks, people who love him and hate him get maybe 15 seconds, get maybe 20 words from him or about him, and that's how they decide if they want to follow or hate. And I think the truth is way, way more complex than that. Even, the clips from some of the things that he said that have been hurtful, I've gone and looked at, and they're more complex than that. There's more nuance to them than that. And I think it deserves to be said that there's more context there. I think it's also true that there is harm there. Both are real, both are true. And I'm glad that we get to have a conversation where we can talk about those things as a nuanced topic, as opposed to a holistic affirmation of everything he did or said, or a holistic condemnation of everything that he did or said, because nobody is that simple. So I'm glad that we get to actually sit and go through some of these things.
Yeah, that's good. I think one of the things that comes up a lot in these times of violence, really, whether it's school shootings, which obviously are deplorable and abhorrent and evil, and an assassination like this, which is equally as evil, is spiritual warfare. People want to assign things from the physical world to the spiritual world. And I think, how do we, Mark, even maybe you can speak to this a little bit, just how do we speak to that without sensationalizing it, but also acknowledging the reality of demonic forces at work in our world.
Yeah. Yeah. Ephesians 6 talks to this really clearly, that our enemy is not flesh and blood. And that's part of the problem of what we see. Whenever you see something that has devolved into violence, it's because somebody has seen an enemy as somebody who is flesh and blood. And usually when there's murder that's involved with it, I would contend that there's probably demonic activity that's involved in that as well. That's what Satan wants to do. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and to persuade people that that's the solution and that other people are the enemies. Any way that they can create violence in between us is something that's successful for them. What we have to realize is that the people on the other side of the political aisle, ideological aisle, those are not the enemies. Those are people that are loved by God, created in his image, and have incredible value. And our job is to engage with them in such a way that helps to enhance their value, maybe persuade them of something that's different, but never to engage in violence. So when we say who's the enemy, we all have a common enemy, and that's the enemy of our souls. And Ephesians 6 says really clearly that our job is to stand against him, and to be people who pray. And so to invite people into that prayer-filled context of saying, listen, there is a very real battle in this world for the souls of people, and there is a very real enemy, and our job is to identify who the enemy is, don't treat other people as the enemy, stand for what's right, and be people who pray.
Yeah, I remember, I was really young when this happened, but I remember a time John McCain was running against Barack Obama for the presidency, and John McCain was giving a talk. He had a rally, and he was taking some questions, and there was someone in the crowd who stood up and said some things to try to discredit Barack Obama. I don't remember exactly what they were, but John McCain's response was, "We're not doing that. We're not going to mudsling. That's a respectable man. He's a decent man. We disagree on a lot, but we're not going to accept any kind of shame or anything heaped on his name." And that stood out to me as an example of kind of how we as Christians ought to act to our enemies as well. I think that we have an opportunity to, as a people with a very unique belief system, to be in a position like this socially in a time like this, and be a force that humanizes the people we're supposed to hate, and let that contrast be a sign that Jesus is king. I think that we have an opportunity, the Christians in the Republican Party, the Christians in the Democratic Party, those of us who vote one way or another, those of us who believe one way or another ideologically, to say, I disagree with them, but I don't hate them. I don't accept hatred for them. I don't accept discrediting, demonizing, dehumanizing them, because they're made in the image of God. I think that influence actually genuinely has the ability to change the world we live in. Mm-hmm. I think that stance, that position, can genuinely turn a time of political divisiveness and violence that we're living in now into a time of actual harmony and civil disagreement. I think that we are empowered by the Holy Spirit to do these things, taught by Jesus to do these things. And I mean, sometimes it can seem naive to have hope, I think, in times like this. But I think that there's real, actual hope offered by the words of Jesus, that we can change the way that things are now.
That's good. I think we also live in a world that so much, and when it comes into spiritual warfare, when we marry it to fear-based, sensationalized stuff, that's where we get dangerous. We've not been given a spirit of fear, a spirit of love and a sound mind. And so I think a lot of times we are over-assigning maybe some of the spiritual warfare that's happening. If my response is fear of this enemy, he's going to get me, then I don't know that I'm not clinging to the victory that I have, And so I think oftentimes in that we just merge the two, and we start this fearful rhetoric and fearful, like I want everybody I know to know Jesus because of where the world's going to go. And man, I want everybody to know Jesus, not because of the world, where the world's going to go, because of who Jesus is and what he can do for their life and the kingdom that he invites them to. And so when fear is the tactic, of our warfare, or that we're fighting fear with fear, man, I think we're just missing out on so much freedom. We're missing out. Our souls are being robbed because we're just in this constant state of like angst and worry. And those are not the fruit of the Spirit, right? And so how do we continue to have peace in the middle of these things? How do we continue to have self-control, all the fruits of the Spirit? How do we continue to take heart knowing Jesus has overcome the world, and in this world we're going to have trouble? And so I think that's where I just see so much fear and angst and anxiety in Christians in moments like this. And there's a proper, I think, wisdom to exercise in it. But man, if you're walking around everywhere looking for reasons to fear, man, I think maybe you're not spending enough time in the Word of God, or maybe you're not spending enough time asking the Spirit to be dwelling in you and filling you, because I think you can have peace, and that surpasses all logic, all understanding, even in the middle of all the chaos that's happening in our world. And so, man, if somebody's rocked right now, turn to Jesus. He is the only one that is going to be able to provide a peace when everybody else around you is rocked. And sometimes I feel sometimes when I have peace and everybody else doesn't, that something's wrong with me. Like that I need to if I'm not responding in fear, if I'm not yelling, if I'm not doing these things, then something's that I'm broken and I need to do what everybody else is doing. But that's not the call, I think, and the fruit that we're called to bear as Christians as well.
I think that's really good. And I one thing I feel like we have to mention too is with someone like Charlie, he had a podcast, right? He had television shows. He was all over the internet, and in a society where people were very lonely and isolated. They had a parasocial relationship with Charlie. They had a friend in him who was saying the things that they couldn't say. And I think that's something that when that person's now gone, that they're feeling this, and they want, I've heard person after person on social media say, "Oh, I'm picking up his microphone. I'm going to continue what he started." And to that, I think, that's a really great sentiment to have. But I think if we're talking about from an evangelistic standpoint, there was nothing preventing you from doing that before. And if this is the catalyst that got you there, then that's great. But I think also if I saw a limb hanging over my neighbor's house that was about to fall and destroy his home, you know what I'd do? I'd walk over there, knock on his door, and tell him a limb was about to fall and destroy his home. If there's a politician that people want to support, they put a sign in their yard. They don't hesitate or think twice about it. But when it comes to things of eternal life and salvation, a lot of times we're much more hesitant, and we're like, "Oh, well, I don't want to offend them, and I don't want to, we wait," and we're much more tactical. And it's like, not to say that we need to go out there and bring on some sort of preconceived notion of what Christians are in this crazy sense. But I do think, man, that sense of urgency that can fill our hearts when these tragedies happen is important to hold on to and go, no, I think now's the time. And I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else. I think it's like, now's the time to act. When you have those moments of conviction that you don't want to talk to someone and introduce them to the Savior, the creator of the universe. I mean, that shouldn't be something that we dance around as much as think as believers we often do. Are there any closing reflections or thoughts as we kind of start to wrap this conversation? I want to make sure that we've made room for everybody to share those. Yeah,
I just say continue to be gracious and good listeners to people as we go through this. Continue to have interpersonal conversations about things, and not just out on the web kinds of conversations about things. You'll get extremist views that are out there if you're ingesting social media related to this, or even 24-hour news media. But talking interpersonally to people is the best way to be able to have gracious dialogue around controversial subjects.
That's really good.
That's good. I am really sick of people telling me to hate other people. I don't know if you guys feel that way, but our leaders, politicians, celebrities, I mean, there are very real powers and principalities, physical and spiritual, who get a lot of benefit out of us fearing and hating each other. And man, I am just not up for it anymore. I want to let anyone else who feels that way know that I'm praying for them, praying for a real physical, tangible, spiritual way to not stand for it anymore. Like I'm just sick of hating people. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's worse.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think if you're inspired by the hope that Charlie did have, Jesus is where you're going to find it. You know, be discipled by Jesus. Find a church, find a place where you're able to wrestle through these things. And man, if you're doing this in isolation or just on the internet, you need to do this in community. you need to have conversations that are open like this, because it's he wants us to stay isolated. He wants us to build bitterness inside of our hearts and to keep people away, because part of being made in the image of God is being made for community. And so, lean in, don't run away. I think things like this, we lean in towards God, we lean in towards community, or we go the opposite way. There's no neutral.
Right.
And so maybe figure out which direction you're going. And if it's not running towards community, running towards the church, running towards God, then you're running the wrong direction.
I also want to add on, in parallel to that, if you feel hurt by anything that Charlie said, Jesus is actually there for you. Like he genuinely cares, believes in you, thinks highly of you, affirms your value. If that's not what you heard from Charlie Kirk, if that's due to things that he actually said, if that's due to misunderstanding for any reason, Jesus sees tremendous value in you and wants to be a part of your life.
All right. It's a heavy time, and I think we've acknowledged that. I hope as we move forward past this, we can all do that with grace and kindness and compassion. Thanks, Mark and Dante. Thank you for joining us in this conversation.
You bet.
Thanks for having us.
Hopefully it's beneficial and edifying to the body of Christ as they are processing through this stuff alongside us. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us. You can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media on Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast. Feel free to call and leave us a voicemail. You can do that at 402-885-9930. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.